we talk a lot about trauma in the work that we do with my group at Yale and in this Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative. And usually what we're talking about, or prior to this current crisis, we were talking about adverse childhood experiences and the types of trauma that we as educators are used to encountering in our work with children and in schools. So we have on the left the model of what has happened with children who have experienced trauma, a divorce by their parents, violence, an illness. What happens after children are exposed to trauma, we know, we've seen it sometimes in our own families, sometimes in our students, is that fear, anxiety, and depression is heightened. The symptoms of those types of problems, fear, anxiety, and depression, are heightened. And that leads to children having difficulty regulating emotions and behavior, learning, and interpersonal relationships. Those of us who are trauma-informed, trauma and responsive know that you can't just look at that bottom circle, the difficulty regulating emotions and behavior, without considering the things that might have led up to that. What's new in this situation is that you have those children who have experienced those ACEs or other types of issues, but now all of those things have been magnified by this broader context within the spring, the pandemic, the disruptions, the violence and injustice that is being discussed more openly and honestly in this country, the health and safety concerns that many families have, the disparities that have existed within this pandemic and that are being brought to light with disparate exposure to illness and trauma, and fear about the future. And that's not only happening to our students, it's happening within us. It's happening within us as parents and families, with our kids, among our staff. And that's really important to understand. But what we want to also understand is that schools play a really important role in helping build resiliency and helping to mitigate some of those traumas that children and our staff have experienced, that we have experienced. So next slide. So we think it's really important not only to focus on the trauma and to be aware of that, especially as you are making plans for the future, being responsive to trauma, being flexible, as all of those things that Missy talked about. But that's not the end of the story. If we are thinking about building schools to be compassionate and responsive to the needs of children and the other people within our school community, we have to take a multi-pronged approach to helping children and the adults around us become healthier. So we have to reduce the causes of stress and trauma at home and in society and school as much as we possibly can. We have to support children individually, recognizing where kids are at, what resources we might be able to bring to bear. We have to develop protective factors, so bringing in families and parents, building up those family and community connections. And we have to help kids have a greater sense of agency. We have to increase that in ourselves, learn new skills, whether it's mindfulness, like the great family meetings that Paul was talking about, or whether it is employing anti-racist educational practices. All of those types of things, those discussions build resiliency, and these things together help us move forward in the right direction. And those are all things that we have to think about as we're building our visions, as we're going through the visioning process, is to think about these different ways that we can help children and our staffs build resiliency in terms of their own health.
I'd like to let you know that there is a real connection between the compassionate mental health model that Martha just presented and what we call the 5 C's of heart-centered learning, which are consciousness, compassion, confidence, courage, and community. I'll talk about those in a minute. However, important elements include competent, caring leaders, self-care, the connections between home and school, and making sure that staff are well informed, that there is some mental health literacy, professional development going on. Because, as we found out, many schools and teachers don't know about the neurobiology of trauma. They don't know, particularly about the little things they could do that might make a huge difference for kids going through trauma. Next slide.
So I'm going to emphasize for the group that self-care component. Chris, you said it so well. Sometimes the smallest pieces are the most meaningful. And for those of us listening today, whether you're a leader of schools or you have another role that you play, but you will lead and influence others in some manner, be sure to be consistently checking in with those that you serve, with your students, with your families. But do check in with yourself as well. Oftentimes, we are the people that don't have somebody beside us, making sure that we're checking in. So that self-care component, if you take care of you, then there's no question that you can be there for them, whoever them is for you. So take that seriously. Write down something in your area that after this webinar, you're going to go do for yourself. You need to take care of yourself.
So I just want to say, all that we've been talking about really ties with our vision for heart-centered learning.